I love starting off videos by rubbing my eyes to death, but maybe it's just because I can't stand the absolute glory of Jeremy Gutsche. I am so glad you are here. People who maybe haven't met you before, but kind of know you at a distance, would have to start by saying TrendHunter. They'd say TrendHunter because that's the brand. I mean, it is your brand, but like they knew the brand before they knew this Jeremy guy behind it. Was that the way it was meant to be at first? Was it meant to kind of be a non-direct to you kind of brand?
Well, the funny thing is that all I ever wanted to do was be an entrepreneur. As a kid, I was the one that had a dozen little businesses that I was always testing, but I couldn't figure out what was right for me. And it became like an obsession. And so then I ended up becoming a consultant and then a corporate innovator. And I actually grew a bank, $1 billion business. But the whole thing is the career path you end up with if what you really want to be so bad as an entrepreneur. So you're just always hunting ideas, but you can never pick. And so it was out of desperation that I finally, in 2005, before Facebook, before YouTube, I taught myself to code. And I'd get home from the bank job and I started coding up this virtual community, TrendHunter, which is one of the world's first crowdsourced websites. But the idea was a place where people could share business ideas. And truthfully, I thought maybe some TrendHunter in Europe or a TrendHunter in South America would submit the little business that could inspire my own. I didn't realize that it would take off because so many of us are searching for our idea. So traffic went from thousands to millions to billions of views. Pretty soon it had more traffic than pretty much every newspaper in the world, except it didn't have a business model to it. So, I was literally using it as a tool for my own market research. But when it got to that big enough critical mass, I quit the bank job, had a few ups and downs in figuring out how to make it work. And then eventually we realized its power as a corporate research tool. And so now we work with about 700 brands, and I think we've done 10,000 custom trend projects. So pretty wild experiences we've been able to be a part of.
So the very first sentence-ish that you said was kind of grew $1 billion worth of business. You said that almost kind of like the way some people say, well, I used to work at Arby's and then I got this other business. Can you just kind of stretch that out 2 or 3 sentences?
Sure. So I ran the sort of analytics at a bank at Capital One, and then I started running the high-end business line and the innovation teams. So my team was responsible for finding all of the new sort of products or services that we could offer, and we would do dozens and dozens of tests per month. And as a young guy with a $30 million budget that could be used on research or testing, it's a really being in banking is a really cool spot to be if you want to learn how to research and develop at kind of a very top tier level, because you can try everything. And we had a couple of really big wins. So those grew a portfolio, of $1.5 billion, which sounds terrific. But to find your 12-year-old entrepreneurial wannabe self and say, you grew up to be a banker. And it's like, wow. So I really appreciate everything that I learned, and I had a lot of fun in that experience. And it definitely primed me to be able to use TrendHunter in a much bigger capacity to sort of recognize it as an analytical tool for people. But fundamentally, it was ends to means. I was just trying to find my own business desperately.
So Scott, my friend up in Southern Maine, likes to talk about, wanting to know sort of the stumbles and learning points along the way. When you look at someone who's super successful, sometimes it's really tricky to fathom, what it was like when things went wrong. You mentioned just a little bit at the very beginning, talking about TrendHunter, you mentioned what it was like to not exactly have the business model, even though you built the traffic. Do you want to talk a tiny bit about that?
I will tell you the hustle and the struggle, the failure and the outcome. So I'm a guy that believes chaos creates opportunity. It's probably the one sort of thing I'm most sort of expelling at all times. And then the other thing is the fact that your own success is your biggest enemy. And the metaphor that I've used in a couple of my books in different extents is that the hunter versus the farmer. And it's this idea that 1 million years ago, we were all hunters in a nomadic world, eat or be eaten, adapt or die. So you have the capability to hunt new ideas in these times of chaos or change. The problem is that 10,000 years ago, we became farmers. And when we did, populations thrived, we succeeded, we grew because now you could stay put. But after 10,000 years of evolution as farmers, we're pre-wired with traps that block us from trying something new. And actually in the new book, Create the Future, I get into the 7 different traps of path dependency, which are effectively the traps that our farming instinct has caused us to have. We put in rules, policies, procedures, structures, status quo. We have traps that are related to our neural pathway. It just keeps compounding. But let's now bring this to me and my own failures. The takeaway is success causes you to not try new things. When I had this little nighttime project coming home from the bank and coding away at TrendHunter, traffic was growing. I told you, more traffic than all the newspapers in the world. No business model, but what I knew how to do, my little comfort zone, was growing page views. And so I quit the job, and we had some, ad money coming in. But the thing is that I also sort of thought, I'll just keep growing page views, I guess. And even though it wasn't, paying all of the bills perfectly, it's got so much traffic. I'll keep staying in the lead, and eventually someone will acquire it for the page views. The thing I didn't expect is that these CEOs, I was consulting on the side. I didn't mention that, but maybe about 30 of the different media CEOs I was consulting on digital strategy because they wondered how this little company could have more traffic than them.
Right.
But then my own expertise made me think I'm always going to stay in the lead. But it's senseless to think that a little 10-person company at the time is going to stay in front of big media tycoons as they start pivoting their empire. So as that happened, and then the ad world started evolving, I suddenly had this thing where instead of doubling every 4 months, we flatlined, which doesn't sound terrible to not shrink, but flatline. But it does when I'm planning to keep doubling, because it meant now I was on track to lose about $1 million or fire half of my team. And that was the most difficult time in our sort of pivot. But what I knew it was is, I was caught in this trap of thinking my comfort zone was just grow page views, even though there wasn't a business model. So in desperation, we started looking for all the little pockets of money that we might have in 1 or 2 places. And one of them, the funniest one, is that I'd had a keynote client, Nestle, I remember, her name was Sarah, and she had sent me an email, and I hadn't replied to it for 2.5 years. And the email said, can we make a custom version of TrendHunter for Nestle? And then maybe you can do some workshops and some, tools around it so we can use this for us. And I hadn't replied to her in 2.5 years. So I replied back, and I was like, hey, is 2.5 years too late? Are you still interested? And she said she was. And by about 1.5 years later, we had maybe 90 brands that had signed up for, I don't know, call it 10 to 100K. So the business completely pivoted, changed. That filled the gap of the $1 million loss. And then fast forward, that's become our business model. However, I look at that and I see it as another failure of mine, because what if I had listened to her email
2 years earlier
and met her for a coffee? What if my team had just done a brainstorming step? But it shows that when you're successful, and for me, success was page views, then you don't open your mind to these new ideas, these slight twists and turns off of your course, because new ideas seem awkward and unfamiliar, and so you don't give them the right chance.
So success is a bit of a jerk burger in a lot of ways, because you get it. That resting on your laurels turns out to be far more deadly than people ever give it credit for, is what you're saying. This is a good way to talk about. I feel like your first book was the book you knew you had to write because everyone told you write the book. I feel like this book, especially with kind of like the little teasers you've let out over the while on Facebook and so, I feel like this is the book you've really wanted to write. Can you talk about it lovingly, like I know you feel?
So, do I have it here? Who knows if I have it?
Oh, I have it here. Let me bring my baby into the picture.
I was like, I should have some product placement, but I don't. Anyway, it's a 2-sided book called Create the Future. On one side, flip it over, and it's the Innovation Handbook. And it's a 360-page book that is my life work in a way. So books 3 and 4, but all wrapped in one. And basically, the Create the Future side is all about the 7 traps of path dependency and then disruptive thinking. So how would you break from the past that block you from seeing your full potential? It's about the fact that we all have another path that we could be on. We have a higher level we could be playing at, but there are certain cognitive traps typically related to our success that just blind you. And if you better understood those traps and the tactics out of them, then you would be more likely to get to your full potential. So that's the Create the Future side. flip it over, and it's called the Innovation Handbook, but it's actually version 2 of my very first book a decade ago, Exploiting Chaos, which was sort of an end-to-end handbook about all the things you'd need to do to make innovation happen. So creating a culture of innovation, trend spotting, adaptive innovation, infectiously messaging your idea, but all little steps and tactics you need to do to actually break through all the noise and find your opportunity during chaos. So that's, I wouldn't launch a book on March 12th during a global pandemic. It's available in bookstores everywhere, especially airports.
Wait. So for our non-professional author friends, did you invest in some airport placement?
I had a really big book launch, and we did all of the stuff you would possibly. This is, TrendHunter is much bigger, so it's a pretty decent 6-figure book launch. But the thing about it is, it's sort of predicated on the world not being in a state of crisis. I study and talk and work on chaos a lot, and I would separate out in your world how you think about chaos and crisis. And just to add a little lingo, we are usually in a world of path dependency, and that means we're stuck to our traps. Things are going well. Then we have a crisis, which is the current period, and we're working from home. And then there's chaos, which is recession and people open-minded to change, and then we rechart our path. The difficulty of crisis is that crisis is only good for gun makers, mask makers, and hand sanitizers, stockpilers. Crisis isn't really good for anyone, though it does create a sense of urgency. What's next? Chaos, that's a terrific time. And that's what the book is made for, because chaos is when the deck gets reshuffled, the winners and who's in the lead shifts. And there's a lot that you can do to really thrive in those time periods of change. It's just separate from crisis. And I wouldn't launch a book and have it in bookstores that people can't go to.
Yeah. So Carrie asked the question, are you just going to keep writing books every pandemic? Because, I think that might be a particular model that you can try to follow, is just wait for every massive shift of everything at once. That sentence, by the way, is so worth some yellow highlighter. The idea that crisis is really bad for business, but chaos is delicious.
Yeah. So if we look at chaos as an example, the companies founded during periods of recession include Disney, Hyatt, Burger King, Apple, Microsoft, FedEx, HP, Fortune Magazine, Uber, Airbnb, and I can go on. I can give you 100. And it's not that they're coincidentally started in those times. It's that they thrive specifically because in a time period of chaos, consumers are more interested to try new alternative products. We get into a mind shift of perpetual change. Something changes in work or in what we purchase for our home, but then actually it trickles to all of our purchases. And so we enter a mind frame where we're willing to look at alternatives. I'll give you one example, and that's that Fortune Magazine was started in 1929, 4 months after the Wall Street crash. Fortune, it was priced at $1 an issue, which is the price of a wool sweater in 1929. So it seems ridiculous. A luxury publication priced so high during the Great Depression, and yet they ended up with 500,000 subscribers and $7 million of modern day profit during the Great Depression. Makes no sense. But actually, they just solved a new consumer need, which is that people lost their jobs during the Great Depression in the first time that it was a corporate economy. Therefore, the first time that people lost jobs because of decisions made behind corporate boardroom doors. So Fortune offered a glimpse behind those boardroom doors when we emerge, and put differently, it's an answer to a new consumer need. So chaos is great. Chaos creates opportunity. Crisis is a little bit different.
Jeremy, you mentioned that your shift from sort of typical media product, where like the views are everything, to a very customized subscription product for some kinds of verticals. Did you pick a handful of verticals just based on kind of who you had around and what kind of content you had, or how did that process work to kind of get the subs that you wanted for those high ticket subscription experiences?
Yeah, so TrendHunter's in a lot of different markets, but almost all consumer facing because of the products that we cover on the site. So on the site, we cover retail, fashion, tech, design. And so our clients include like Walmart, Google, Starbucks, sort of Louis Vuitton. Like it's a parallel to what you actually see on the website. So I think that mostly the types of verticals that we went after, we're looking at where our content is. And the only other exception is our culture is bananas. Our office is amazing. And we have so many little things to make it like this extremely fun sort of millennial culture. So it was really funny to me that a lot of our first clients, I was like almost laughing the second you said it, because the first dozen were like every alcohol company. It's like, really? That's
right.
Picking up the phone first. Is that really? It's not because you just called them? Anyway, so yeah, we started working basically first for every alcohol company, and then that trickled into the other content categories on the site.
Carrie has to go and do real business, by the way, Jeremy, but I'm going to let her get in one more question. How do you steel yourself so that you're free to innovate in chaos rather than react emotionally? A lot of people hid under their bed, me included. How do you kind of like get yourself ready to go and go, yep, some chaos?
Yeah, so that sounds funny to put it, but I think part of it is motivating yourself to really know a lot of the case studies about how chaos does create opportunity, and it becomes much less intimidating when you start seeing chaos as your ultimate shot to get in the lead as the decks get reshuffled. This is when you can actually emerge, because everyone else is getting very intimidated by it. So the starting point of looking at just how many brands and examples have come through this period can be really, really motivational. The second part would be thinking about your life, your time, your team's time, like a portfolio of a financial portfolio. So if you think of your stock portfolio, you've got some high risk bets, and then you've got the medium and the safe bets that are sitting there. And with your stock portfolio that when the markets are down, you don't quickly go and sell your high risk stocks because they're the ones that will rebound first when you get out. That's something that people generally understand, a stock portfolio. So even though finance isn't always as sexy as other industries, I do find that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the industry that understands risk better than any other industry and how risk equals opportunity. So find ways within your own week that you're partitioning off some time to be fully experimenting and trying new things. And it's less intimidating if you're sort of containing the box of how much time you're putting into these brand new explorations versus other stuff. And it will also protect you from eliminating that box. Smith Corona invented the laptop word processor, grammar checker, spell checker. They started selling computers on shelves in 1990. And in 1991, the global recession hit. So they got out of computers. They should have stayed if they had a stock portfolio approach, because they would have said, well, that little gamble's the one that we kind of believe in long term, so we got to do something there. But instead, they abandoned their joint venture partner, Acer, and 3 years later, Smith Corona declares bankruptcy, and their little joint venture partner goes on to become the second largest PC maker in the world without Smith Corona's help. And that's one example of many of how a stock portfolio approach as a company or even as an individual can help you ensure you keep the ball rolling and in your words, steal yourself away to have some time to actually make this all happen.
A lot of entrepreneurs are professionally and intellectually promiscuous. They have an idea, they build the idea, they run away from the idea. They have an idea, this idea is also sexy, I'll build that one instead. You do a real lot of that kind of work. Carrie, I know you're probably going to go, so thank you too. You have been sort of true blue loyal, monogamous, let's say, to TrendHunter for some amount of time at this point. But what I noticed in and I don't know if this is Jeremy Gutsche being very professional, like you just had all these stats, all these details. You feel like you hear that in your head. To me, I feel like this is you as a teenager with baseball stats kind of a thing, or me with comic book stats. Are you very married to this, or could you chuck it all and open like a juice stand? Who are you?
Yeah, so I love more than anything this idea and concept that you have a better idea, a next level that is within your grasp that you're overlooking. And TrendHunter is this collection of ideas. And then the work I do with the books and that our TrendHunter speakers and researchers do is all about trying to unleash one's full potential through the tactics and strategies to actually get there. So I think that really sums up my motivation. It was actually our trademarked old slogan, which is find better ideas faster. How do I help you find better ideas, but faster? And I think about it in relation to the story I told you of myself, which is that, and I could have give you the longer version, how as a little kid, I was obsessed with finding my idea. that led me to the corporate world where I spent a decade, but I probably didn't need to because I just kept looking and looking for the idea. So when I started working on TrendHunter, my mission has been, how do I help you not spend the 10 years as a kid and the 10 years as an adult that I spent just looking for what didn't feel like my purpose? How do I help you get there quicker? And so everything I do is pretty much wrapped in that. And TrendHunter is certainly a manifestation of everything that I'm trying to do. And now I don't want to do another business. I want to just do this thing where I'm helping other people to get to their better idea faster.
Nice. So that's that's a soft transition for future Jeremy as well, I guess. That sense that
there you go.
The sense of you'll be having people up to the manse to understand that. So besides wine, which Carrie pointed out, besides wine,
my bunker for COVID. I'll survive here for a long time.
Besides that, what are some of your other passions? What are you doing when you're not behind the keys doing this kind of stuff?
It's so funny because this stuff I love is so wrapped up in TrendHunter. I love speaking. I love creating content. I love finding and discovering new things. And I love futurism. And all of those things are manifested in TrendHunter. So every year, at the end of the year, I have a meeting with my accountant. And he sits me down and he looks at all my personal finances. And then he looks at all of the business. And he says, but where's your hobby? Like, why don't you have a hobby? And
right.
I like photography. He goes, that sounds like it's an expense for business. Yeah, okay. Well, can't you get anything else? It's like, this is what I love to do. I don't know. So I'm truly happy that I'm doing the things I love. And what else do I love? I guess travel. But I've now done 700 keynotes in 700 cities, more or less. So I get to do that as part of this role too. Not during COVID, but as soon as we're back and COVID doesn't last forever, I'm back to my hobbies of travel and hunting trends.
So some of our friends have said they don't miss it. And, they love the crowd part. The things we all agree is that our speaking friends love the stage, love the people, love after the speech when you get to shake some hands and really get that story bite in the hallway kind of a feeling, and sometimes a beverage later. They don't miss planes. They don't miss the entire mechanics of travel. As a trend hunter guy, do you see, especially with the airlines getting punched in the belly like this, do you see any changes as far as that set of mechanics go, or is it truly just going to be back to business as usual when everybody comes back?
Yeah. So I like the full chain of it. I like travel. I don't mind the airports. That's my time to be alone with my thoughts and be introspective. So when I sort of talked about crisis versus chaos, I think that's a really important thing to relate back right now. If you survey people and say, how many of you think you're going to work from home permanently? Currently, I think the numbers are like 15% think that's what they're going to do. If you ask people, will you go to a concert in the next year or two? There's some amount of people that no, they'll never do it. But right now, people are making decisions in crisis. This is not a permanent state. COVID does not go on forever. Oh, but there's things that say that it could, the second wave, and we might not solve it. Yeah, we'll solve it. We'll figure it out. There will be, we're on track to have whatever the vaccine or cure is, or it'll fizzle away. And guess what? Do you know how many pandemics there have been in our life? Like basically none. In my parents' life and my grandparents, it just doesn't happen. And even these numbers are not actually intimidatingly scary. And, sorry for sounding insensitive for those that have been impacted in other ways, because truthfully, it's a disease and it's terrible in that sense. But this does not last forever. And once it's done, how do you want to celebrate the birthday party of your parent? Do you want to do it virtually, or do you want to do that in person? Do you want to go to, I read an article today about a top travel writer, and he said, do you think that people want to fly to Ireland to go to an Irish pub and sit in a plastic closed off bubble? No, we are social people, and realistically, for our office, for our teams, culturally, we like to connect with people. And this, I think we're already getting enough Zoom fatigue on the amount of, adverse impact. So you can't make the decision of what the future is going to look like in a period of crisis. Afterwards, maybe some companies will have a higher proportion of some virtual events, but more to get a global reach. But for others, we want to get back to business. And actually, just before this started, Chris, we were talking about the metaphor, which is one I really like, which is that right now it's like use a metaphor of a restaurant. We're all renovating our restaurant. We're changing it all over, and we're putting our menu and our pictures of our food on Instagram in order to stay close to our clients. But do you really want to just serve up food on Instagram, or do you want to actually serve a meal? So I think that's where we're at.
I see it. Our friend Chloe, who's in Scotland, says, I love when you ask business owners what it is they do for fun, because the response is almost always this. This is fun. Like, Jeremy, you don't understand, but the entire span of this show, I asked that question to so many people, and most of them don't have an answer besides, I just like really working on my business. It's so strange to me. How does that translate into what people know of you outside of, your direct business circle? And what's that like at home when, you love business? What's that? How's that translate?
So I mean, at home, my fiance, she's an entrepreneur. So she's got a business. Actually, she'd started an analytic company that analyzes influencers to know who's trending, so marketers can more predictably pick what's next, with almost the same client list that I have. So that was a hilarious way to bond in the beginning. And now she works on social ventures of trying to help those same influencers start micro stores selling goods made out of ocean plastic, stuff like that. You can check her out, influenceforimpact.com. But the thing about it is then that means we've got loads of conversation on those topics that we're always excited to talk about. And then if anything, we know we could get too carried away on business. So we actually have a certain call sign. If at some point during the date where it's time to stop talking business, we pull the parachute. And if we pull the parachute, it means, absolutely no talk of business. And then one of us will be like, but this isn't exactly business. And we'll try and, so I think that's fun to find someone that enjoys talking about that stuff too. But the other note, just talking about this whole concept of how entrepreneurs love their business, I think there's something in there that I would have as advice to my younger self if I had such an opportunity, which is people say, but there's sort of a cliche way to say it in a normal way. People say, try to find a business that you're passionate about. Okay. But you know what? If I told that to my 19-year-old self, I was a skier, I'd try to start a business as a ski tour operator. Like, that's not what it means. But I think that I spent too much time trying to look for what would be a profitable business, whereas they are a market opportunity. And then that caused me to evaluate so many things that I almost chose that would have just been so boring to me. But instead, what do you get passionate about solving? What type of problem? Are you a people person? Do you like analytics? Do you like understanding that aspect, and then picking something you're passionate about should actually be your sole driver? And the lesson for an entrepreneur at heart would be, this isn't going to be 2 years of your life like you think it is, and it's not going to be 5. It's probably going to be decades. So think about what builds your ideal resume 10 years out, or just allows you to keep building, because that passion is what will allow you to sort of build your base, your empire, all of your sort of positioning for whatever next steps that you have.
I think it's, also in yes, and as the improv boys say, I think it is it's when you can sort of find those intersections. So it's I love this thing, and I think that I can, kind of find some ways to put some money around it. And then the other one, I think about Julian Smith, my co-author on Trust Agents and also Impact Equation, also friend, Julian Smith. I think about him, and he didn't want to solve breather. Like, he didn't say he wanted to come up with an idea how to make offices that you could get into with your phone for a few hours. Like, that wasn't his plan. But I do think he's passionate about, I wanted to create something whole cloth. I wanted to create something where I could, imbue a culture and see how that was going to go and all that. And I think that the passion wasn't the product. The passion was the baking. And I think that's another way to look at that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I love breather too. We've used those a lot of times in Toronto.
Right. And this is how you can tell I'm not trend hunter. This is it right in a nut. He brings that idea to me. He goes, what do you think? I go, I think it's awful. I think nothing. No, it's no good. And like, I have always been wrong.
So in Create the Future, the first of the 7 traps that I get into is the subtlety of disruptive ideas, because what happens is that the first round of an idea is not only new and novel, but it's typically awkward and unpolished. So to use the Smith Corona example again, just because we had already talked about it, their first versions of a computer, the versions looked clumsy. So they had made a typewriter thousands of different times. So their typewriter could save on a disk, and it had a screen, and it was perfect. And who are their customers? Multinational corporations, governments, banks. That's a great, clean and tidy device. But by comparison, if you remember the computers of the early days, Commodore 64, whatever you had an external computer, and then you had an external monitor, and then you had an external big floppy drive and an external little floppy drive, and then you had an external dot matrix printer, and you just had this mess of stuff compared to a clean and tidy and neat little typewriter. Well, that's because they made a typewriter 1,000 times. So the first version of something looks clumsy and awkward, and it's already unfamiliar. And so then it's so easy, especially even for a market leader, to dismiss the new idea because they know what they've tried and tested and where they're going with their already sort of perfected device, even if it's not the right device for your client and customer.
Yeah, it's Henry Ford endlessly, faster horses. You know what I mean? It's always that quote that just comes right back to me. But Carol says she loves your quote. So true. She's a Montrealer, by the way. So
nice.
I always point out fellow Canadians to each other because I want people to know this is an international show.
There we go.
America's hat is doing fun.
We're taking over your channel.
Well, I got to tell you, it's I was talking to my ex-wife yesterday, and she says out of the blue, she goes, how I always say we're moving. She's Canadian. She was from Labrador, but was a Noof. She always says, how I always say we're going to move to Canada? And I say, yeah. She goes, I kind of really mean it now. And I said, well, can we wait till November? But, yeah, I mean, I get it. So the first version of something always looks clumsy. That is, when you said that about Smith Corona, so I remember that, I remember looking at that sort of iteration in like books and things and saying, oh my gosh, my dad was an early computer guy back when it was like, the terminal and the big mainframe and the big green and white paper reams and all that sort of a thing. And no one's going to want a PC. Like no one's ever going to want that kind of power on their desk. There's all all of history has been sort of anti-trend until suddenly it is everywhere.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? What is that flip switch that happens? Is it just we're just so we have no vision, or what is that flip switch that happens?
So it's funny. A lot of these stories, whether it's Smith Corona or like Kodak and the digital camera, I've interviewed all of those people. That's like my fascination. What I don't understand is that I can give you 100 examples, I put like 30 or 40 in Create the Future, of where the market leader is the one that missed out. So whether it's the quotes from like the CEOs and billionaires from Palm and BlackBerry and Nokia, totally trashing the iPhone, but like the actual quotes, I found them all as an example, and they just hate on it so much. And in Kodak's situation, the guy I interviewed, Steve Sasson, invented the digital camera in 1975. And what happens is that they know that no one like dismisses fully the idea in the market, but then the leadership teams and the experts have tried something like it, and then they know the customers didn't like it because it was so early, and so then they just dismiss the next rounds of it. So in the Kodak example, the whole culture was actually based on one thing, which was beating Fuji with a perfect Kodak quality print. They were enemies. Outside Kodak's office, Fuji bought a convenience store to turn it into a billboard that said, we're hiring. So everyone would drive past it. They hated each other. So when Steve Sasson made this digital camera, it was super cool. They let him keep working on it. He got to take a picture of the CEO that day. He talked about how they would share photos over the phone lines and share them and save them on discs in 1975. But they didn't do anything with it because they had built their brand around solving the problem of the perfect Kodak quality print, beat Fuji. And that was so entrenched. He told me this wicked quote. He said, a company's great culture can be the seed to its own destruction. And it's pretty powerful, but that explains so many other brands that had missed out. And so then I think that when things don't take off, in part it's because the first version looks a little bit clumsy, and then the big brands don't necessarily jump into the market right away, typically because they're solving the wrong problem. They're solving the Kodak quality print, or they're solving the best typewriter company in the world. But in both of those examples, if they thought of the higher level example of what they were solving, well, for the typewriters, it was helping people record human thought. And for Kodak, it was trying to capture, images. And if they had pushed up their problem they were solving up the value chain, then they would have had to try these new things and play with those clumsy and awkward ideas. So bringing it all the way back to your thing, it's that the new first examples are clumsy and awkward, and you need to assume potential in rival ideas, even if they seem clumsy, and think of that higher level problem that you or the device is actually trying to accomplish.
It seems so interesting that even when they have that knowledge, that sense, that it still can be challenging to them. Alan Mulally, well over 10 years ago when he was still running Ford, said, we have to get out of the car business. Like, we have to stop thinking about this as a car business. There's still a car business. I mean, the best anyone's come from that is they think that, really focusing on what's inside the car is really interesting now. Like the technology suite that exists inside a vehicle is where they think they're competing now, which is, of course, not anybody's real desire. How is it that, well, I don't know. I guess this is how you can have this business until you're dead if you want, because it seems so foreign. I mean, we can't see outside our own cage anyway, but it just seems so foreign to get to that next level, to say, I think this is what I'm working on, but I really need to think like this because this is what my people need, which is different than what I'm working on.
Yeah, I think it's it's another little thing I like to sort of bring up. Actually, I put it in one of the traps. Is this word called optionality that is pretty big in finance, but it's this concept that we make fewer big choices in life than we think, and yet you could make choices that open up more options. So the example would be, I ended up, effectively at a bank pushing credit cards 8 or 10 years into my career. But how does that happen? Well, I guess I was choosing between a couple majors in school, and then for one or two little reasons in one course or another, I ended up majoring in finance. Then I interviewed a bunch of different companies, and so did you. And then you and I picked the company that offers $2,000 more than the other one. And you don't think you're going to be in that forever. Or in my situation, I don't think I'm going to be in the credit card business forever. But then 3 or 4 years in, you start to become an expert. You're making more money. Maybe you have a life event. You have a win. Now you get promoted. Now you're doing really good at, in my case, credit cards. Okay. But what about the other things I wanted to try in marketing? No, can't do that anymore. Now you're a credit card guy. And then you add it up. And if you switch jobs, now it's too much of a trade-off. I'm going to move to another credit card company, and pretty soon that's what you're an expert in. And we all can trace our life to often 5 or 6 decisions that were maybe even made haphazardly. And in our companies, the same thing happens. So we make fewer big path-altering decisions in life than we think, and we really stay committed to things from a long time ago. You can make decisions that open up more options. That's the interesting thing, that there are more paths for you. So in this simple human example, if I didn't want to be in credit cards anymore, I could go back to school. I could attend conferences in a different industry. I could network with people in a different industry. I could get to know my vendors and see if I could sort of intern at one or something. So there's ways in the human's life that you can imagine. The challenge then as a company is to make your decisions not just based on what's profitable and what's not, but what decisions open up more options, more pathways in the future, so that maybe you can still be finding those other paths as the opportunities come along.
I feel like you gave us a really interesting detail that might have slipped by some people a little bit ago. And that's how long it took me to catch up to it in a way. You said about, people getting back to travel and that sort of thing. I said, what are airlines going to do different? You said, not a lot. And I was like, oh. And by the way, I've had this moment, I don't know how many times now in the show, where I think I've cued you for like some incredible run, and you're like, I'm just going to hit your ball right under the ground. But in a loving way. But there's a lesson in that, Jeremy. What you said was basically, this isn't as dramatic as you think it is. People's deaths notwithstanding, all the craziness notwithstanding, all 40-something million US people out of work. That's not the point. The point is, the thing isn't as dramatic, and we will swing back to a whole, past, generation of what we were just doing and kind of restore from last known good, way more likely than we'll innovate is what it sounded like you said. I just want to double check and make sure I was listening well enough.
Yeah, I mean, humans are people, and start in the most basic core level of your family and extended family. Do you want to get together for a meal, or do you want to play a game over Zoom? Okay. Do you want to experience your favorite band at a little bar live? Oh my gosh. Or do you want to just keep listening to them on your, your Google Home? And you just keep adding it up, and humans are social people. And regardless of what we think during crisis, it will be different when we're not in crisis, and we're just not going to live with a pandemic for the rest of our lives. How many other years of your life have you been paranoid about a pandemic? Never. So,
right.
But it's tough to imagine, and there's so much to read, and it's a downward spiral. Oh, what if they don't find a cure? We'll be in this forever. All right, I don't think so. I bet against.
It's pretty impressive. Jeremy, what's your new dog's name?
Forest.
Because he runs? Is it Run, Forest, Run? Is that the?
I guess so. I live across from a forest, so there's my sort of forest view.
Oh wow!
And so I don't know. Now we have Forest in the Forest, Run, Forest, Run. I'm not sure, but we liked it. It worked.
Is that what do they call it up there? Is that Dominion land? Is that nobody can touch it kind of forest, or is that going to be a help someday?
Yeah, it's City Park, so it's called High Park.
Got it. Very fun. Very fun. Forest it is. Jeremy Gutsche, thank you so much. Sorry, I choked on my throat. Thank you so much for being part of this whole thing. And as I say many times, you can get to your website, jeremygutsche.com. You can follow you on the tweeters. Also swing by TrendHunter, that old thing. Thank you so much for being part of this today. And thanks for sharing your stunning view and your stunning views with us.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the program.
You're so good. Thanks. All right. Everybody else, get out of here. Don't need you here anymore. You're all good. Bye.